I'm so thrilled to have seen so many of you at so many different events. The reason why we keep having this festival is because you keep showing up, and we're so thrilled that you do. I didn't even mean for, yeah. I'm losing my voice, as you can tell. I'm hoping it's the pollen. We'll see anyway. I want to thank our premier sponsors, the White Elephant and the Nantucket Athenaeum, as well as the Nantucket Enquirer and Mirror, and our many sponsors and donors who make this event possible. We have so many events that are free and open to the public, and I think that's really fantastic. So after this presentation, there'll be a book signing in the little teen nook in the back over there. Books will be for sale there as well. At this time, again, I'd like to ask you to silence your cell phones. A cell phone went off while I said that last time, so I would appreciate it if you check, even if you're not sure. So we're thrilled to welcome Woody Tasch back to Nantucket. Woody will be interviewed by John Stanton, documentary filmmaker and writer. But first, I'd like to hand things over to Amy Zelensky, the Executive Director of Sustainable Nantucket, to kick things off. Amy?
Good afternoon. To quote Woody Tasch from Soil 2017, "We drive our Prii, that's plural for Prius, to Whole Foods, while our retirement accounts are invested in Monsanto and Coca-Cola. We recycle, but we trade oil stocks on our iPhones. We vote for pro-environment candidates, but we don't think twice about flying whenever we can. We donate to environmental organizations, but don't know how to rid our portfolios of Defense Department contractors." It was difficult to choose a quote to introduce Woody Tasch, but I feel like this embodies the struggle that I and many other Americans deal with. Hi, as Mary said, I'm Amy Zelensky, the Executive Director of Sustainable Nantucket. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce Mr. Woody Tasch. He was one of the founders of Sustainable Nantucket, which was originally called the Nantucket Sustainable Development Corporation back in the 1990s. Even though our mission has changed from environmentally responsible development to that of improving our local food system, I'm pretty sure Mr. Tasch would approve. Some of the topics that stuck with me in Soil 2017 were the concepts of nurture capital, investing in farms and local food, soil health, and food waste. Mr. Tasch is asking us to reconsider our relationship with food and money. There's no better time than now to be having this conversation. I'll close with a quote that Mr. Tasch includes in Soil 2017 from Mr. Paul Newman, whose Newman's own company gives away 100% of their profits to charity. "In life, we should be a little like the farmer, who puts back into the soil what he takes out." Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so pleased to introduce Mr. Woody Tasch and Mr. John Stanton.
Well, let me start the ball off by saying something you probably don't hear at book festivals very often, and that is that I found the first 20 or so pages of this book.
Don't say this.
Oh. To be a mishmash of
Don't say this.
poetic moments and references that I just didn't understand. But at one point, I began to realize that what it was a collage, a direct look into Woody's head. Because visionaries see the world different than we do. And Woody's idea is to make us think differently, not to have people think the way they think when they're being taught how to be investors, to use the artist side of their brain, to see investment capital as a creative act. So let's talk about that a little bit as a jumping off place.
Okay, I like the last part.
Okay, there you go.
So, my new book starts, well, before I go there. So my first book on slow money, I actually think it's important just to say this really fast. So this came out 10 years ago, and as a result of this book, there are groups in a couple of dozen communities around the country, and more than $65 million has been invested in over 700 small food businesses, and we can talk more about that when we get to the Q&A. But the reason I mention that is this book was me just taking some time off after 30 years in various philanthropic and investment activities to try to figure out why, despite all of our wealth, almost none of it was getting to certain things that really needed to be done, like small-scale diversified organic agriculture and putting carbon back into the soil and community health and whatnot. So what came out of it was the idea of slowing money down, thinking longer term. And the reason I just wanted to go back there is some poetry in this book. And as you will not be surprised to hear, for some people it was like, what the hell? I don't quite, it's not linear enough. I can't quite figure out where you're going. What's the thing? But for another few million people, not that they all bought the book, but I believe that's kind of the audience that I'm directly talking to. They felt like it was shining a light in a direction that was important to them. So the reason this book starts off with a 20-page, intense, quirky, poetic masterpiece. I think that was the word you were looking for.
I was struggling to find that
I
word.
understand. I wanted to start this one with, like, you cannot pass go. This book you could kind of get past go and kind of meander around and kind of ignore the poetry if you wanted to. This one, I thought, after 10 years of going around the country talking to people and feeling the energy that was there, I wanted to start with something that would get you out of your left brain immediately. Like, you can't get past the first section of this book and stay in your left brain.
Kind of a crystal. One reviewer compared Woody to Henry David Thoreau, which is, since we're sitting on the stage where he spoke, is a nice connection. But because what the book does, I think, and I'm not an investor, and it crystallizes the thoughts of people who might be out there who see this as a good thing and haven't really said, I can stand up and do it. Am I right in thinking
Yeah,
that?
so there's a line in the book which is very prosaic that says, Wendell Berry lovers, what in the world are we going to invest in? So I'm guessing there's a fair number of Wendell Berry lovers in the room, otherwise you wouldn't come in on this beautiful day to talk about nurture capital. And actually, the idea, the word nurture, depending on what I kind of pull out of here to read, there's a beautiful passage at the beginning of The Unsettling of America, which is arguably Wendell Berry's seminal work. And in case there's anybody here who hasn't heard of Wendell Berry, like, if you want to try to compare someone to Thoreau, I suppose it should be Wendell Berry. Except he's written 50 books now, he's in his 80s, and he should win a Nobel Prize and everything. Anyway, in The Unsettling of America, he has this beautiful passage near the beginning of the book that explains the difference between nurture and exploitation. And he kind of frames our culture as that we've become a culture of exploitation, and all the nurture stuff has been gone. Nurture being about character, condition, quality, and kind, not about numbers, not about profits. Nurture being about the health of your household and your family, not about the profitability of a company, which is more of an exploitive model. So that's where so the idea of nurture came from that, and I would say, to your point, you didn't quite ask it this way, but I'll just kind of loop it around. Sometimes people say, how are you ever going to convince people to do this? You're turning the ideas of investment totally on their head, and it doesn't make any sense. And I luckily stumbled on the answer, which is I'm not trying to convince anybody to do anything. I'm just trying to help, to your point, people who already feel this is true. Wendell Berry lovers, what are we going to invest in? And if you really do take to heart issues of soil fertility and biodiversity, nonviolence, sense of place, various other carrying capacity, it's pretty hard to manage a portfolio of investments. I would say it's almost impossible to put money in public markets if you actually really deeply care about those things. Now, there's no way to get from that to, like, what do we do? There's only some things we can do, and one of the things we can do is make loans to small farmers and help build soil in our communities. And so that's what the slow money movement is. And this book is my effort to kind of put back into the public domain all the energy I've been fielding for the last 10 years talking to people.
One of the things we spoke about when we talked on the phone was the gap between investors, the Jeremy Grantham kind of investors who want 7 to 10% back on a return on investment, and are actually, have a fiduciary responsibility to do that, and Wendell Berry, that gap between an agrarian and someone like Grantham. And you met Grantham. Tell us that story.
Okay. The story is a truncated version of the stories in the book. So I was giving a talk at about maybe 2011 to a large group of people, and at that time, actually it was 2010, I'm remembering when it was now, because I had 2 slides in the presentation from the summer of 2009. One of them was from The Economist magazine, the cover of The Economist magazine, and it had a picture of a textbook, a graphic illustration of an artist rendering of a textbook, and it's melting. The textbook, and the title of the textbook is Modern Economic Theory. Now remember, summer of 2009. And Jeremy Grantham had written in his newsletter that the efficient frontier no longer is valid in explaining investment and portfolio behavior. The efficient market hypothesis, sorry. And that created a big kerfuffle in finance, and a few months later that cover went on the Economist magazine. And so I would give that in a talk, and I was not a financial crowd I was talking to, it was an environmental crowd, so I didn't mention Jeremy's name. I just talked about the cover, and I said, yeah, a leading financier said the efficient market hypothesis is no longer valid. And he comes up to me after, he says, hi, I'm Jeremy Grantham, who's in the audience. And so immediately, first I said, you are? Yes, and he said, yes. And I said, am I in trouble? And he said, and what he actually said, I didn't put this in the book because it would have seemed too whatever. He said, no, I loved what you said, and I think your book is quite interesting. That was this one. And we got into a long conversation about it. Now, the punchline to the story, to me, as a social entrepreneur, is trying to make something happen. And that's important to say. These books are not just musings. I mean, they are musings, but they are now firmly enmeshed in a process of organizing and getting people to do something. And, let's see, where was I going with that?
The difference between an investor like him.
Oh, just about the musing part. And so Jeremy said, the punchline is, he gave, I'm going to say the number, which is a little bit odd, his foundation, which is a $150 million foundation, after he said, I agreed with pretty much everything you said, and I really liked your book, whatever, he gave us $25,000 once. And to me, I mean, I don't know how you guys, I'm talking like to a bunch of friends here. You could say that's great, or you could say, damn, come on, if you really believed it, like, help me do this thing. And the reason he didn't do more is he was very intrigued, but he felt it could never scale. I'm going to go back to your point in a second. He felt a bunch of well-intentioned local investors putting money into local farms is a beautiful thing, but it can never scale. He's thinking about billions of dollars at a time. He is not the one who said, it's also in the book, Ron Lieber from the New York Times called me one day, and he said, I'm doing a column called Investing for the Truly Fed Up, and I discovered slow money, and I'd like to talk to you. Like, what do you got for me? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, all my investors are, they don't want money to be in nuclear, they don't want money to be in defense, they don't want money to be in tobacco, they don't want this, they don't want that, but they still need to make 7% on their money. Thank you for laughing. And so I said to Ron, I was right with you up to the 7%. And he said, what do you mean? I said, if you believe everything you just said before that, you cannot then say you need to make 7%. And to make that story short, he ended up putting slow money in the column, even though we were the one thing he listed that didn't have a product to offer investors. Everything else was like a REIT and a this and a that. But he was intrigued. So the bigger point, I think, here is we are kind of a hybrid. If people, and by the way, it is important for us to focus. There is a book that is an artifact, and it is very artistic. And now we're talking about the actions, right? So it's important to kind of hold the two things separate. But as an action, we are kind of a hybrid of investing and philanthropy. If you just want to try to, like, what's nurture capital? Just think venture capital over here, maximizing everything. Then you make something and you give it away over here. And nurture capital would be this very gray, what would be considered ambiguous to the modern investor middle area, which is, just to give an example, if you want there to be more small and mid-sized organic farms in your communities, how many people here would think that would be a good thing? Okay, it's kind of a softball, I hope. But if you do want that, and you know how hard it is to buy land, get started as a farmer, when the farms work, they're not very profitable. Like a beautifully functioning, diversified organic farm, when it's firing on all cylinders, maybe a 15-acre farm might gross $300,000 or $400,000 and barely eke out a living for the family that's doing it. That doesn't mean it's a bad business. It just means it's something that needs to be done that is not very profitable. And if you just let me finish this line of thinking, I'd say that to me is one of the many indicators that modern economics is really bankrupt morally. If the things that are the most healthy and that we need the most in our communities cannot make money in the current system, we have a problem. So we can either try to convince the Jeremy Granthams of the world to change what they're doing, which is not a very fruitful way to go, or we can try to empower the Wendell Berry lovers of the world, of which I'm quite sure there are millions, to just take some of their money out of Wall Street and out of traditional philanthropy and put it to work directly in their communities.
We spoke about this, and this is in the book.
Yeah.
How did we, and I know this is a giant question, and I'm asking you to answer this in a couple of minutes, but
No problem.
how did we get here?
Oh, yeah. This reminds me of, so my friend Tana and I came down through Hudson, New York. I did a couple events on the way here. And at the risk of sounding self-whatever, I'll just say we met a hedge fund manager who had read the book. And he was just, you know, kind of beside himself. And he said, I just never thought about stuff like this. And oh, my God, everything. And then he said, but I have a question for you. I said, what? He said, is it too late? It was kind of it was a little bit the same question. He said, is it too late? And I said, well, probably, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do the right thing if we can figure out what that is and we have some wherewithal to do it. So how we got here is, depending on how you want to count, let's say a couple of 100 years at least of industrialization, globalization, and then the last 50 years, this dramatic acceleration and spurt enabled by computers and abetted by population growth of just technological innovation, industrialization, wealth creation. And for those of us in this room, we grew up with that, so we kind of accept it as the only way things are. It just seems like the world. It's like water to a fish, you know, you can't see it. But it's not, in my opinion, it's not sustainable. It seems obvious it's not sustainable. I'm not talking about any one thing, I'm just talking about the whole thing. That kind of acceleration, that kind of growth, that kind of wealth creation. And I think we're seeing the creakiness of all of our social institutions and our politics and our economics, you know, $400 quadrillion worth of derivatives. I mean, come on, it's not sustainable. It's just a question of exactly how it's going to, you know, when and how it's going to start creaking worse than it already is. So that's how we got here. You know, how we get out of it is not obvious, except I think slowing some of our money down is part of the, you know, is part of what needs to happen.
And it seemed to me reading your book that there is a good that comes out of that goes beyond a ledger sheet. Talk about that.
A good about slowing your money down. Yeah.
Yes. That whole about contributing to something that's nurturing rather than sort of out of control capitalism.
So financial people who are working in this area who are working on something called impact investing now, which is the latest phrase for socially responsible or triple bottom line investing, are laboring very hard to come up with new numbers that you can add to the old numbers. And the new numbers are the social and environmental impacts, but you have to quantify them so that you can add them to the old numbers and somehow justify the activities. But when you're investing locally, if you're giving money to a local farmer, you don't, this is going to sound squishy to some of the financial people, if there are any in the audience, you don't really need to quantify it. You know, if you shop at a farmer's market or you go to Bartlett's Farm let's say you go to Bartlett's Farm to buy something, and let's say it costs 25% more to buy it at Bartlett's Farm than it does at Stop and Shop or something. Presuming that you could find the same product, that's a whole nother discussion. But you know, you go there, why do you go there? There's something innately satisfying about going to a farm to buy something, especially if you trust the farmer and you feel like you understand what they're doing. Depends on, this is a little funny situation. This is probably the most grandiose on-farm store in the United States. It probably is, That's not taking anything away from it or John or anything. But when you're directly in relation to a farm, and let's take a CSA as a little better example, community-supported agriculture. If you are buying I've spoken to, I don't know how many thousands of people who belong to CSAs, and if I ask them, have you ever calculated, if you ever literally calculated any of the following, you know, food miles, nutrient density, carbon in the soil, like what are the reasons you're shopping at the CSA? And I even throw in, how about the relative cost of the food you're buying at the CSA versus where you could buy it elsewhere? Almost no one has ever calculated any of those things. They are convinced that buying direct from the farmer is a good thing. And I wouldn't say they're convinced, I'd say they know it. It is a good thing for them for the reason you're saying. There's an immediate relationship value that comes out of that process. And you can talk about it in terms of all the things I mentioned, nutrient density, health, you know, food in the soil, putting your hands in the soil, bringing your kids to the farm, food miles, reducing food miles, community resilience, having more local food available if there are supply chain disruptions. I mean, there's a million things. Water in the soil. How many people here know the following? Do it as a quiz. For every 1% more carbon in the soil, how much more water does an acre retain? How much more is the water holding capacity of that acre of land? Someone guess. For every 1%, and I know most people here won't even know what a percent organic matter is. So 21,000 gallons. Okay. So if you have 2 pieces of land and one has 3% organic matter and one has 4%, the 4% will hold 21,000 more gallons of water. And one of the big problems with industrial agriculture is water leaches the chemicals out, and it all goes, and then soil gets washed down the Mississippi, and we have a dead zone in the Gulf. And there's a million. There's not enough time in a 20-minute conversation to get into all that. So follow that thread all the way back, and you get to your question, which is what happens when you have a direct nurturing relationship. And there are so many obvious benefits. I'll just tell you a quick anecdote. One of my partners in crime in Boulder, where I live now, runs the farmers market there. Now, the Boulder County Farmers Market is a $6 million a year NGO. The Boulder market itself might be I don't know, they say every good farmers market says it's the largest one in the United States, but Madison thinks it's the largest, and I don't know which one is, but the Boulder NGO is a $6 million a year business that has 4 different farmers markets, 3 in Boulder County and 1 in Denver. And I get together every Friday afternoon for a cup of coffee with the guy who runs it. And we get into all this stuff, and I do want to say something about what we're organizing in Boulder, actually, just on the ground. It's in the last part of the book, called Soil, Slow Opportunities for Investing Locally. So if you'll let me rant on a second, maybe I'll just do that fast so we don't lose it. But before I get to it, I'm colluding with Brian. We're talking about people and raising money and everything. And we just look at each other and go, God, isn't it amazing how much effort it takes just to get people to have fun? And it is actually fun. This is the crazy thing. Once you get over the hurdle of just taking some amount of money, whatever it is, it could be a few $100s or a few $1,000s, and saying, I'm going to do this with it. And then you actually collaborate with some friends to do it. It is a tremendously rewarding thing. I'm not just blowing smoke. That's a true thing. So here's the Soil project. In the interest of time, I'm just going to say the numbers. You can imagine the process or ask questions during the Q&A. So we've raised $235,000 from 75 people in Boulder County in amounts ranging from $250 to $50,000. Now the reason the range, unless you're a farmer, you can come in for $25 because we're trying to get the money to the farmers, not take money from them. And then we are making, by majority vote of the members, so 75 people, simple majority, 0% loans to local farmers. And it can also be like a cheesemaker or a seed company. It's not just purely the individual farm level, although that will end up being the majority of it. So by majority vote, simple majority, whether you put in $250 or $50,000, you get 1 vote. We're making 0% loans. We've been doing this for 4 years in Carbondale, kind of as a beta, so I won't bore you with it. It's not a totally harebrained thing, and there are a few of these now starting to pop up around the country. And that's another reason why the book was named Soil. It is about the actual soil, and it's also about the soil project. And so that's an example of relationship-based, no bullshit, fun. It is actually fun. We get together, everybody gets in, we have dinner, we get a few farmers up there, we talk, and we make decisions on making 0% loans.
Is some of this a throwback to what used to happen? Years ago, I made a film about wooden sailboats, and we had a screening down in Newport. And afterwards, an old boat maker in his 80s came up to me and said, you know what we used to call wooden boats? Boats. Right? You know what people call going down to the farm and getting tomatoes? Tomatoes.
Yeah, it's like Michael Pollan saying, or like we used to call it, food, right?
Yeah.
It's the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same
But is
thing.
that because everything's gotten revved up so much that is a shareholders the bad guy here?
What's the last thing you just said?
Shareholders, are they
the bad?
Yeah. Not that he needs to be a bad guy,
No,
but I always
that's
understand things better when there's a bad guy.
So I think it was, this is not in the book, but I'm pretty sure it was Thorsten Veblen, the sociologist from the early 20th century, who wrote about absentee ownership as one of the really dangers that he saw coming. And to me, that's what basically, even though shareholders don't think of themselves as absentee owners, they are largely anonymous, highly decentralized masses of little calls on something. And the focus is almost always solely on profitability and the shareholder value, right? So if I said the phrase, this will make me sound maybe more radical than I am on this subject, but because I don't tend to focus on trying to tear down anything or trying to fight any big corporation or anything. I'm focused on just trying to do something good at the grassroots level and just focus in a different direction, hence the poetry and all the other stuff. Otherwise, I'd be writing op-ed pieces in the New York Times to try to organize shareholders. But I think you could use the phrase shareholder entitlement. Those 2 words are never put together. There's like shareholders feel entitled to have the first call on all corporate activity and to be the drummer that is You know, and some of the smartest people in the world, including Warren Buffett and John Bogle, who founded Vanguard, and whatever, are talking about all of the things that come out of that that are bad. Mostly short-term perspectives and the drive for ever, shorter time frame, which is, again, slowing down is not important just because it's slow. It's important because it allows you to think long-term.
Maybe this is a good place to do that first reading we were talking about, that poem. The now infamous poem.
The which one?
The poem there on page, where is it, 13?
Well, I wanted to do that only because I wanted to defend my honor as a poet against
go ahead.
Against your introduction. So
I didn't say it was bad. It was just confusing.
that's all right. So he was confused by the following, which is the interior monologue of the goddess Symbiosis. Yes, exactly. I don't know why.
Who would be confused by that?
Exactly. I don't know what the. All right. Maybe you hadn't had enough vodka before you read the poem. I'm not sure. But I assure you I did. All right. So the setting of the poem is, the book is divided into two parts. The first part is called Poetically Incorrect. And it is a 20-page, quirky, provocative, poetic excursion. And it has a story. The story is a bunch of gods and goddesses and a few real people have gotten together on the Continental Divide in Colorado, not far from where I live, to see if they can save mankind. And the only action is they get together, they convene, they say a few prayers, and they sit around the fire. And this is, after they've said some of their prayers, this is the goddess, and these are made up. There's Hermes is in there. There's a couple of people you've heard of, and there's a bunch of made up characters. And a couple of real people, but I don't have time to tell you who they are. So this is the goddess Symbiosis sitting around the fire after everyone has said their prayers, and this is just what is her thoughts. Okay. Don't be confused. Then sighed Symbiosis. North of thought and south of emotion, her inner workings word. Echo traded stories with memory. Whisper of sweet nothing exchanged secrets with mysterious attraction. Everywhere, two sides were looking for no coin. Root exudate and colloidal cation. Concentration and diffusion. Ultrabiological infusion and subterranean collusion. Osmotic acceptance and conjugal embrace. Last call and first impression. Mycorrhizal make-believe and microbial commotion and then some. All conspiring on fecundity's behalf, in earth as it is in humus. Overly mysterious, thank you for chuckling, overly mysterious and underly obvious and utterly pervious, as if, from her right amygdala to left, a curious, fearless arbitrage of flight and fight, after flowing for so many millennia, had suddenly ceased without a trace. Now, I'm so glad somebody chuckled in there at one point, because I did figure out that there is a style to this, in my mind. And the style is lively serious as opposed to deadly serious. And the lively part is overtly meant to be a little bit funny here and there and a little bit edgy, not so serious, because, going back to where we started, this is about stopping the left side of our brain long enough for our money thoughts to go to our right brains and our hearts. And I know that sounds kind of hokey, but for those millions of people who believe in Wendell Berry, it isn't.
Plus, we make decisions in this country based on a myth all the time, right?
Especially now.
The cowboy myth, the myth of individualisms versus community, the myth that you can make it on your own in America. Is this a kind of an attempt to create a new set of myths that hopefully some of us will grow out of? And if you could create a new set of myths, you deserve to be on this stage.
Well, I'm not. I guess I would never say this in too many places, but I'm going to give it a try. But I'm just at the beginning of that. So this is a fragment. This poem, this thing that's in here is a fragment, and a bunch of people have insisted that I carry it forward, and I probably will give it a try. But it's not to create, let's say, a myth with a capital M, but it's to go in the direction of what you're saying, which says it's okay to think like this. It's okay to realize that we're kind of facing the end of some epochal shift of some kind. And there are a lot of people who write, a lot of so-called real economists and real social change people, some of them very famous, who are all calling for a new economic narrative. And Wendell Berry is certainly one of them from the agrarian side. E.F. Schumacher, who wrote Small is Beautiful, who is a constant kind of thread through my writing. certainly was one of them who began, in the 70s, saying that big is not so great. And there are so many elements to what you said. Obviously, we can only touch on a couple of them. But I think probably the greatest seduction of our current situation, this might be saying the greatest myth, that you want to call it conventional wisdom myth, if we want to call it that, is that big problems require big solutions, and that the only way we can work out of things in enough time is to have big global technological fixes to all the problems that the big technologies have created. And I'm not, so my feeling on this is, of course, we need to keep trying to figure out all big technological solutions because we don't have time not to try to do that. But we also have to dare to believe that some of the solutions are just small, decentralized, local. Some of the best things we can do is just to decentralize, diversify. There's a whole thing on biodiversity that we haven't gotten to yet. And if you just think about the food system, I'll quote, since I mentioned Michael Pollan, I'll quote Michael Pollan again. He wrote that in 1900, there were about 95 commercial varieties of potatoes in cultivation, some number like that, or 100. And today, 4 varieties account for almost all commercial potatoes, statistically in the US. It's like 90-something% of them. So why does that matter? And I actually had this conversation last night with his private equity. He said, so what? He said, it's great. Those must be really good potatoes. These new varieties are... Because biodiversity is the basis for all life. Now, do I really know that? He said, he basically said, I said, we're losing a couple hundred species a day. That's kind of a consensus number by a lot of scientists. What does that even mean? I don't even know what it means exactly. I know it's not good. I know it's not a good thing. So,
and it's not even good for the consumer. I mean, we were talking about pigs and pork on the phone.
Yeah.
Well, I was on the phone with a friend of mine the very next day, and he asked me what was happening, and I told him about this, and I brought that up, and he said, who cares? They're pigs. And I said, I care when it's on my plate if it tastes good, and if it's healthy, and that kind of goal at the end, if you need one metric, is almost erased now. When you buy a tomato at the Stop and Shop, it's bred so that it doesn't bruise when it falls off a truck. It's not bred to taste good. Right. And that's what I think that's the sort of easy to understand part. You don't even need to get into biodiversity to see how good that is to do.
Well, so let's not lose that topic. We talk about pigs and stuff, but I want to go back to the myth thing. So if we believe that efficiency is the ultimate standard, and that's a good word too, standard of living efficiency, that's the goal of the economy, and the word quality just stops meaning anything at all. It just doesn't have any meaning. So one pig is the same as another pig. One carrot's the same as another carrot. One of my dear friends is Elliot Coleman, who's a kind of an iconic small-scale farmer up in Maine. He was on the board of Slow Money for a while. And he said, it drives me crazy. He said, people think nothing of spending $100,000 on a car and driving the car off the lot, and it's worth $25,000 less the second they drive it off the lot. But that's quality. They associate quality with that brand of car, but you try to get them to see the quality of a carrot that's grown properly and that tastes better than another carrot, and they go haywire. And why is that? Because we have a myth that food is just a commodity. It's just a commodity like any other thing, but it isn't. It's a living thing that comes out of photosynthesis and billions of microorganisms in the soil. It's just a myth that we can live and treat food like a commodity. So if you go to your hog example, I sometimes show the picture of when I do a PowerPoint of this very cute hog looking right up close to the camera, and it's outside, so it's obviously free range. We don't really call them free range hogs. They're just well-raised hogs, and it's from Nyman Ranch. I'll say the name because some of you have probably heard that brand. It's one of the premier companies that has succeeded in branding sustainable hog husbandry, and on that ranch in Iowa, there are 1,000 hogs outside on 150 acres. So just hold those numbers in your head. 1,000 hogs outside on 150 acres. That may not mean anything to you as an abstract thing. Now let's go to the cheap bacon facility in East something or other, North Carolina, where there are 5,000 hogs in a barn in crates, one hog to a crate, meaning they cannot move. I'm not going to go through all the rest of it because you'll think I'm being extreme or something. This is the bacon industry in the United States and pretty much the world now. And those 5,000 hogs may be genetically identical, it's possible, depending on what the company is, They've been bred, they're genetically identical. They're shot full of hormones and antibiotics. There are all kinds of other problems with it, but guess what? You get cheap bacon. So you can, and if you, so I just had some cheap bacon. I'm not, I'm not that much of a purist that I won't have the ultimate fries over at Fog Island. So and that was probably Smithfield bacon in there or something equivalent. That bacon, whatever that cost you a pound, I don't know, what does that cost you a pound? $4.50 a pound or something. And if you go buy Nyman Ranch bacon, it'll probably cost you $7 a pound. And if you buy bacon that is produced from a beautiful local something, it might cost you $9 a pound. Okay? So then I would just ask you, is it worth a few dollars more a pound for you to consume the thing that is grown in concert with nature and is leaving both? I'm not even talking about the animal welfare, which you can just on that level, you can go into the whole thing. I'm talking about the integrity of the entire ecosystem and living systems as a whole. So is it worth saving a few dollars a pound on your bacon and basically I would say effing with, but I won't say that, screwing around with life systems as we know them in the interest of creating some cheap food? So that's the long answer to your friend. But once you know these things, you kind of have an obligation to try to move a little bit in the right direction, I think.
In the gap between a Jeremy Grantham on one end and Wendell Berry on the other, is there enough?
It's very confusing in here.
Okay.
No, I'm saying in between
that gap.
in between that between those two people.
Is there enough? Are there enough investors that already thinking this way that you can reach out to with this book that can start to change things? I mean, what's the metrics here? 'Cause you must. I mean, this is a lot.
Yeah.
This is now your life. What you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
You must have a metric in your head that could be, could be seen as everything's going the way you want it to go.
I can't really answer that. I mean, I would say, so we gave a talk at a place called Stone Barn. I gave a talk at Stone Barn Center for Sustainable Agriculture. It's the Rockefeller family place outside New York on the way down here 2 nights ago. And there was a woman in the audience who was a New York financial person. I'd never met her. And I go through the whole thing, and she goes, I just have to say that it was during the Q&A. She said, I'm shocked. I think she might have said appalled, I don't remember, at how small this is. How could it only be $65 million and 700 things after 10 years? Like, I don't understand. How could it be so small? And I said, well, hold that thought. That means you think it makes sense. She said, yeah, this is so obviously important. It should be way bigger. So I don't know how fast, I do trust in the word slow. I know it's weird. You say we need slow money quickly, and we joke about that all the time. Because the slow part is about thinking long term, right? It's not about being slow to act, obviously. I would say this comes back to the myth thing. We are giving voice to a radical departure from conventional economic thinking. If you are talking at the level we're talking right now, I think it's perfectly okay to say, just take a little of your money and do it. You don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, I still have a semi-fancy car and a laptop and a whatever. I'm not a Luddite. I'm saying I'm never going to go to Fog Island to eat the ultimate fries. So it's not either or. And actually, this is a great excuse for me to just read another paragraph from the book, which is about the MC Escher stuff.
Okay, that's a good one.
Because, yeah, good. Oh, right, we have to stop. So let me. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
There's no.
No,
I don't
we
have
have
a watch on, so give us a signal.
I do. So.
Well, it's almost a quarter till, but you can go a few minutes late because they're going to be late over there.
Okay.
And so typewriter rodeo, which is after you,
Is it?
have to be a few minutes.
Okay, good.
So you got,
They
I don't know,
they work
Yeah.
fast there at the rodeo. They can have smaller time.
So are you trying to assert your authority, Theron? Is that what's okay? All right. Yeah. All right. So just wind us down whenever you want. So the reason I went there is this is not about either or choice. I mean, everybody, if you bring up these questions, there's a very strong impulse among the conventional myth believers, the other myth, that you're just questioning everything and you're threatening the system as it is and whatever. This is really about saying that if I think I said the word efficiency before, I can't remember, but if you say the current paradigm is designed around efficiency, just throughput, velocity, growth, consumerism, market share, all these things, that's the conventional thing. The other thing we need is diversity. And efficiency almost always comes at the cost of diversity. So it's not about either or, it's about just balancing it. We can't put all of our eggs in the efficient thing and destroy all the diversity. So the reason that's an excuse to get to MC Escher is...
Good luck, we live in an either-or country, it seems to me now.
We do, of course. That's why. So that's actually a perfect thing. So let me just end with a little reading, because it's
Good,
like
good.
a perfect way to wrap it all up. So the first thing is that the title of the book, if I had a screen here, it's Soil, but the number 2017 is under it, almost like a shadow. It's meant to be like a Trump Lloyd thing, meaning if you look at the word soil in capital letters and imagine it's on a hinge and you flipped it down, it would almost make the number 2017. Now, I don't have time to do more than just read this paragraph, but I think you'll be able to follow it. So Soil 2017, it's a word over a number. This is not about numbers, doing these numbers versus doing those numbers. This is about reaffirming the primacy of words over the claims in our attention made by numbers. Reaffirming the primacy of relationships over the claims of transactions. Reaffirming the primacy of nutrition over the claims of cheap calories. Reaffirming the primacy of places over the claims of markets. Reaffirming the primacy of generations and seasons over the claims of milliseconds and algorithms. Reaffirming the primacy of putting back in over the claims of taking out. And then I just do a few more paragraphs here, which are a little bit because of what you just said about the times we live in, and et cetera. I talk a little bit about fakery versus real and about poetry being realer than a lot of other things, but I don't have time to read that. I'm just going to read the last couple of paragraphs of the opening pages of the book that are basically prepping the reader for the 20 pages they're about to blunder into unexpectedly of the poetry. And it says this: "We sense that macroeconomic fixes and national political debates are not enough. We sense that what we are being fed is not healthy. We sense that our cultural compass is no longer reliable, which is why we are all going a little bit crazy right now. If we're going to change course, really and truly change course, we must start by standing our ground against things dumbed down, watered down, Twittered down, trickled down, and hunkered down, against things overly lively serious, remember, against things overly politicized, polemicized, marginalized, externalized, rationalized, systematized, professionalized, fiscalized, intellectualized, and anti-intellectualized. In this pursuit, I've gone poetically incorrect, because I harbor the suspicion that deep down, deeper down than the Ogallala Aquifer and the deepest recesses of fear, millions of us can still find the wherewithal to allow rhyme to flirt with reason in the land of the free and the home of the peaceably inclined." So that's a little bit of my framework for exactly what you just said, and that's another reason. I mean, I'm not trying to solve political problems. I'm pretty apolitical, really. And Diane Ackerman this morning said that, someone said, "What can we do?" She said, "You have to vote." And of course you have to vote. I consider voting woefully inadequate because of the bifurcation and all the other stuff that I don't even have adjectives for. I think local action is way more potent. But again, going back to MC Escher, just think about an MC Escher figure ground. It's not about either or, it's about both. And we have plenty of political action, plenty of lobbying, plenty of money going to politics, and I don't see what the good that's coming out of it really is. It seems like it gets worse all the time, and we don't have nearly enough money going at the local level directly from person to person. So that's why I'm focused there.
So in the end, this book was confusing to me, and that I reeled myself in from flinging it into a corner.
Hey.
Actually,
And look, we're getting along. It's amazing.
Reminds me of this. In our conversation on the phone the other night, conversation reminds me of something the poet William Carlos Williams said, that it's hard to find the news of the day in poetry, but men die horrible deaths every day for lack of what's there.
All right, thank you for that. And yeah, so we're ending. So the last thing I will tell you from this book, just to try to, I can't follow that up, but the very first words when you open the book, and this is meant to be a kind of a clue to what's coming, the modality that you're entering into, there's a tiny little poem on the frontispiece, and it says, "If it's true that we are what we eat, may it also be true that we are not what we tweet."
Is that you? Is that yours?
No, that was William Carlos Williams, I think. No, that was me. All right. So some questions. Quick questions. Yep.
I don't know how to say this, but various people have been
Yep.
But the Stone Barn Farm charges $350 for each meal.
I'm unfortunately well aware of that.
Yes. So, how do you make a movement? I didn't know your first book,
Yeah.
but it sounds like microloans, what we call microloans, and Muhammad Yunus,
Oh.
what he's been doing
Yep.
around the world. How does somebody like the people in this room plug in to the local CSA farm ecosystem and offer money?
Yeah, so I think it was Oscar Wilde who once said the problem with socialism is that it requires too many evening meetings, right? So there's no immediately easy answer to, meaning you have to roll your sleeves up and figure out who's doing what in your community, find out about sustainable Nantucket if you're here. And Diane Ackerman actually said that this morning too. She said, find out what local groups are doing and whatever. And it is the opposite of clicking on your computer and buying Alibaba stock, right? Because you have to take time to figure out who the people are, and then you got to go talk to them. Now, having said that, again, we don't have enough time to really have a thorough discussion of these things. I would just say, first of all, it was going on way longer than 40 years. We might as well mention Thoreau's name since it's already been mentioned. So the thread that's been worrying about industrialization and the separation of man from nature has been going on for a long time. So we're fighting a little bit of a rearguard action. I would say, first of all, check out our soil project, which is a very tiny new thing because that is designed to allow people to participate with $250, partially for what you're saying. And other than that, you just have to take the time to get to know your local farmers. What's going on in this little movement, the $65 million, we have had tens of thousands of people in meetings large and small around the country in dozens of communities. It is a thing. It's still way too small. We wish it would be bigger, but we're just going to keep plugging away. So, anything else? Wendy?
Well, is there a template, like if somebody was going to be starting that, that's
Yeah.
not specific to your, Colorado area?
Yeah, she's asking if there's a template. The answer is if someone calls us and says, we've heard about your thing, how would we start a slow money group here? We do have a staff person who's our official liaison who would lead you through a little something, connect you to other people. And there really isn't any magic. What it requires is one or two people who really want to do it, like more than a little, and have some organizing ability, have some presence in the local community, either as a business person or a farmer, or something that anchors them. And then it just takes time. It usually takes a year or two of inefficient but diverse and beautiful interactions to get it to take root. So I know Theron is worried about time. I'm happy to... Yeah, okay. One more question if you want, and I do want to, I hope a few of you will buy the book, and despite what John said about it, it's quite good. Yes.
I'm just thinking you were saying, Wall Street, how do you get them involved? I mean, you make a independent farmers index, something like that. I mean, they do with marijuana.
Right. So it is very, this is a huge conundrum in general, and it goes back to the myth thing almost. It's like, which frame are you looking at? The hardest thing I've ever done in my life, in my career, I didn't talk about my background or things I did before, but I did a number of different things that led to this. And the first time that I was in public with my first book was in Point Reyes, California. Some of you may know the town. It's actually maybe the West Coast sister to where we are right now in some way. We had 100 people in a room for a day, and it was really, really exciting. And then my then board and I went into a retreat the next day, and we said, okay, what are we going to do? This is like, there's tons of energy for this. It was before any investing had started. And all we did in a day of the hardest retreat work I ever did is decide we're not going to create a fund. Okay? Now, that's a partial answer to your thing. Why not? Because a fund manager spends their time saying no to things and managing against some arithmetic. That is what you do when you're a fund manager, any kind of fund manager. You say no to 9 out of 10 or 19 out of 20 or 99 out of 100 things so you can manage towards your arithmetic goal. And we realized we want to say yes to more than that. We're not sure how. Now, and then there's another part to your question, which is it's very, very tempting, especially in the money culture, especially when we're used to thinking about billions and trillions of dollars, to think we have to create vessels through which billions can flow. Maybe someday that someone will figure that out. I'm not sure it's possible for this. We are talking about truly diverse, small-scale local activity, and I'm not sure you can ever intermediate it like that. I'm not sure. My mind isn't closed to it, but I know we can't start there. So I think we should go. I'm going to go over here and sign a couple of books and gab with whoever. Thank you.